All right, I want to take you back to the 2025 college football playoffs, Texas and Ohio State. Texas is down 7, fourth quarter. They get pass interference, and they're first and goal at the Ohio State 1. Whole season's right there, 1 yard line, college football playoffs. First down, run up the middle, no gain. Second down, they hand it off. Wisner gets dropped for a 7 yard loss. Now it's third and goal from the 8. Third down, incomplete. Fourth down, Quinn Ewers gets strip sacked, and the game's over. What should they have done there?
Yeah, so this is probably my favorite stat, and maybe my biggest argument that I've tried to make over the years, that I really cannot believe that more teams are not taking this approach. But essentially, really the mind-blowing stat is if you go back since the year 2000, there has never been a single time that an NFL team has been stopped on 4 consecutive sneaks on a set of downs. And not only that, there's never been a single time they've been stopped on 3 consecutive sneaks on a set of downs. And so if you think of it from that perspective, the play is so effective that essentially you're looking at most likely something like a greater than 99% chance that you're going to, if your approach is we are going to sneak consecutively until we get a touchdown, that you're probably looking at over a 99% chance that you're going to convert it. And things, the area of maybe you fumble, but realistically, the odds of fumbling on a quarterback sneak are essentially lower than the odds on a regular play. But one of the kind of key nuances when people get caught up in just like strictly success rates is that the failure of a quarterback sneak is very often just a 0 yard gain. And so you're avoiding the catastrophic outcome where Texas runs the ball on second and goal from the 1, and next thing you know, it's third and goal from the 8. Like that is not going to happen. And I think people get caught up with sort of missing the fact that even, the NFL scorekeepers are essentially told if the ball is less than 1 yard or less than 2 full yards to go, they're going to catalog the play as 1 yard to go. And so what actually happens is, first of all, sneaks convert at the highest rate on first and goal at the 1, at the highest rate on second and goal at the 1, highest rate on third and goal at the 1, highest rate on fourth and goal at the 1. And that's over whatever sample of time frame you want to look at. So first of all, that would just kind of directionally motivate me in that direction. But many cases, the actual QB sneaks down there, they gain positive yardage. Now, the scorekeepers are going to list it off as a 0 yard gain, but say you were at the 1.5 yard line and you gain 1.2 yards. Well, the scorekeeper is going to list it as, okay, sneak for no gain. But realistically, you gained over a yard and you're much closer. And so that even, you start pulling up the specific exact gain yardage, which you can get if you're, working on the team side. Way back about 10 years ago, I was manually logging this with an army of interns, and we were just looking through every single TV copy you could ever imagine to attempt to subjectively do this. This is like before the GPS tracking era. But once you kind of are familiar with these stats, it makes it almost difficult to watch an NFL game at times, because you see teams every week, whether it's college, pro, you go to a high school game, and teams get down there and they get stuffed, and these plays are so consequential. It might be going from a touchdown on the drive or 0 points or settling for a field goal. And coaches' careers, players' careers, seasons are really defined by some of these key moments. And I think even in the event you're Texas and you think that Ohio State has a great defensive front, that would actually motivate me even more so to not try to run other run plays.
Yeah.
With the idea being, if they're really good, there's them actually may be more likely that they penetrate into the backfield. And when there's less time constraint that you need your offensive line to successfully execute their blocks when you're dealing with a situation when, you essentially are just running a sneak versus everyone has to be perfect. You're running a toss play, and next thing you know, it's really a disaster outcome.
Yeah. So, like, we went through the college games too, and it was like a million snaps. Like, I don't know what the exact numbers were right there. I think you have them on your side. There was like a million snaps we went through, and we couldn't find one of these that failed there going back to 2014. So, this is a stat that is legitimate. Like, there is real data behind this. Um, Operationally, one of the things we were talking about that was really fascinating to me is you were saying teams shouldn't even go down there and try to do a hard count. Like, just the whole way this thing is being done around the league seems counterintuitive. And there is a very data driven, very obvious way that team should be operating in this area of the field. You've been on those sides of the things. You were the director of analytics with the Raiders, with the Jaguars. You won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. Um, Being part of these conversations, being on the inside of it, like, why is there a reluctance, you think, to maybe just go all in with some of this stuff? And what are some of the coaching points that you would share with someone if you were trying to advise them on, hey, this is what you should be doing at the 1 yard line?
So what I would say with the cadence issue is that's one of the worst outcomes that can happen is, a team tries to get a little funky with the cadence. We're going to go on two. Next thing you know, it's first and goal at the 6. Well, your odds of converting on that set of downs is much lower. And if you say you do successfully get them to jump, you may have taken the ball from 2 feet away from the end zone to 1 foot. So you just think of like the basic risk reward.
Yeah, it's
It's really
insane.
suspect, and you actually run into some of the best defensive coaches that this league has ever seen. And the name I'll bring up is Belichick. Is he would find ways to try to stem and move the last second right before the snap down there, thinking in particular this is like a situation where we're in such dire straits as a defense that we need to try to do something to potentially put them in a more difficult situation. So if you're a defensive coordinator, the relative risk actually makes sense to try to do something to get them to jump, because if you're looking at uh, defensively, if the other team is first and goal at the 1 yard line, and this is regardless of if they called sneaks or not, they're going to score a touchdown about 89% of the time over the last 10 to 15 years. And say they're second and goal from the 1, you're looking at they're going to get a touchdown, maybe 83% of the time. And of course, if they move back, that number falls off, dramatically. So that's an area that's super important. And also, as people kind of mess around with the cadence down there, there's been cases, whether that's in the run game or just getting a snap off, whether that's under center or shotgun, where teams have actually fumbled the snap and the operation has resulted in a fumble. So getting cute there is so really unnecessary when you hear these stats of like, essentially, if we just kept running sneaks, like we're going to get it nearly every time. I want somebody to do this and fail, just so like I have an example case, and there are going to be cases where it doesn't work, and just to basically say, okay, I'm not saying this is a 100% proposition, but I feel pretty good that it's pretty high, like as in it's, and people are not doing that enough. And you run into different issues, I think, around the league, whether it's some coaches are prideful and they I didn't come up with this idea, or I'm worried about the quarterback's health risk. And there's been moments over the years where there has occasionally been a quarterback injury situation on a sneak, but the injury rates on quarterback sneaks are incredibly low, to the point where it's, you could argue it's less than if you decide to drop back and pass. So
Is that right? That's
it's there.
crazy.
It's very debatable, with like they're so infrequent that these things occur. But at one point, it was like one of every 400 something sneaks that there was an injury occurring, um, at least on the quarterback sneak standpoint. But because of all these numbers, I think that it's interesting. Like there's some guys want to be flashy. They want to run a trick play down there. I was part of whatever the Eagles running the Philly special, which I think is kind of the ultimate trick play. But I don't know. It's always been something that I've kind of battled with people. And there was one coach that was 100% all in on this strategy, and that was Jeff Stoutland with the Eagles. And it got to the point where he would chime in on the headset, like, just we'd get to first or second and goal, third and goal at the 1, and he would just be like, please just sneak it, because we would talk at times, I felt it was almost better if it was coming from him. He's a run game coordinator. He's the macho O-line coach that is like fighting that battle, rather than me sort of trying to advocate for it. And if somebody that's like a true old school coach is arguing that point versus just the numbers guy, I think it helps really move the needle a little bit more. But yeah, like once you kind of are familiar with the numbers, it really is shocking. And part of the reason it doesn't even get to those points is because if you're presented first and goal at the 1 and you elect to sneak, it converts for a touchdown at a higher rate than any other play. If you say, okay, in the event we ran sneak on first and goal from the 1, we're going to do it again, it's an incredibly high rate that either on that first sneak or that second sneak that you scored. So it's really not getting to that third point really even very often. You're already talking about a very high odd, very high odds that you're going to get it already by that sneak sequence. But you do over the years, you've run into some times where teams, whether it's down there at the goal line or anywhere on the field, they may run two sneaks in a row and they have not converted after two, which by the way, that sequencing has happened a little bit more commonly in the last couple of years as teams have really picked up the sneaks. But you see that combination, and then teams are sort of discouraged and they want to go in another direction. Next thing you know, it's third down as a pass, or third down is, they toss the ball out and they lose two and they're kicking a field goal. So I think there's a whole nother discussion we can get into as well about, do you go the world of the tush push, or do you go with, an organic regular formation? And that's definitely going to be a major talking point on this sort of topic.
No doubt. So real quick, just tell me if I'm crazy, because it would seem to stand to reason to me too if you invested in this play as if it's going to be a core portion of your offense the way the Eagles have. And I was at a coaching clinic and I saw Doug Nussmeier do a whole presentation on how they practice the tush push, and it's in the walkthrough before practice. Then they go to lunch. Then they come out and they practice. And Jalen in the center and the offensive linemen are working on all that and the stance and how he's releasing and all that stuff at the start of practice. And then they do it again in another portion of practice. It stands to reason to me, the more you practice something like this, maybe the injury risk would go down too, because you're so fine tuned at it. So like if you invested in it, would that risk of injury for the quarterback go down as well, or am I maybe overstating the impact of that?
I think that's a real good point there, and the real point that I think when you're getting a ton of practice reps is that you're having, different blocking opportunities against all the different front presentations the other team might do. Most of the times the injury situation comes up for the quarterback when somebody kind of gets a free hit on him. And if you say got a ton of reps every single week all year from week one through the Super Bowl, getting like dealing with, okay, if they do this, if they blitz guys off the edge, if this guy tries to jump over the top, like you can sort of understand and make sure that somebody can, generally get some kind of body part on these guys to at least kind of mitigate the aggressive impact there. But regardless, like what you talked about there, I think is a great point regarding this is such a consequential play that you have to practice it. And a lot
Yeah.
of these teams that I think over these last couple of years thought we're going to just copycat the Eagles and we're just going to line up our guys and it looks just like them and we'll just snap it and we'll get it every time. And it didn't necessarily work out like that. And so there's definitely a lot of nuance to that. And you also see that these defensive coordinators have been studying exactly different ideas like, okay, we're going to try this, we're going to try this to try to slow the play down, that there have been some at least defensive ideas that have sort of mitigated the tush push kind of formation. And I think that is an interesting point going forward. I really think that lining up in a more natural formation where you actually can have a player that still is like essentially in a pushing type alignment is probably preferred versus turning it into an 11 on 11 mosh pit in there. And Buffalo, I think, is sort of the great example there, where they many cases it might look like an I formation or just like a normal single back look, but they might do it out of 11 personnel, or they might do it out of a formation that they actually could run another play. And you have to honor it. Like if they split a receiver out, you have to put a guy out there, or, we can talk about sneaks all you want, but, you put an uncovered receiver out there, the quarterback can just snap it and throw it. So there's, there's a balance there where you don't necessarily want to take everybody out of the box, because there is some benefits to having some guys, whether one person can help push a little bit, or one of the interesting stats is like if you're creating a little bit wider edges on each side, it usually is actually more effective. So from like a football scheme standpoint, if you have a three-man surface on both sides, as in like you have your right guard, right tackle, and a tight end, you having that on both sides has generally been a higher QB sneak conversion rate. So, and it's actually a pretty meaningful boost there. So part of that is too, when these teams have run sneaks over the last decade, when you might have the guard and tackle both blocking down, and then somebody just comes off the edge and just pulls the quarterback back, versus if you have sort of a wider edge and a bigger edge that they have to get around, it's really almost too far of a distance that they really have to go.
I know we talked about this on another broadcast, but I think it's pertinent to this conversation too. You've studied a lot of the Buffalo quarterback sneaks and going left, and I know you have some insight into some of the decisions that have gone into like why they went left and just some of the details that go into making this a successful play. And you mentioned it was due to the way the center snapped the ball so that he would have the free hand on the other side. What else was Buffalo doing that you think made them so just automatic at that for so long? And just what are some of the details that as you're studying it on your side, like the little just marginal edges, just to give you that little bit of
Mhm.
advantage?
Yeah, so I would say for sure, there was a stretch, and for people that hadn't seen, the tweet that I had put out there, that entering that AFC Championship game that the Chiefs ended up stopping Buffalo a number of times, they had gone left on their sneaks 70 consecutive times, and that is a real number. I manually went through each one. It's not even really ambiguous. They're just clearly left. And I had sort of um, gathered some intel, I guess you could say, about that. And one of the things that people were bringing up, particularly from centers or a couple different offensive line coach types, was that against these sort of balanced distributions, going left was maybe preferred, at least in part because the center is snapping with their right arm, and so they can immediately be blocking with their left side or have their left arm available. And so there'd be cases where there's a player in both A gaps, a player in both B gaps on defense, and you'd watch Buffalo, and Mitch Morse would take the snap and he immediately goes to that left player, and Josh is obviously going that way. But like in these scenarios where you essentially could choose one side or the other, that was like a clear preference of them, and then they were so effective doing it. And so the other look that they were seeing at times that I had studied a little bit too because they were just crushing it was some teams were deciding defensively they were going to play like a head up nose tackle and 2-3 technique. Some people call that a bear front, whatever you want to call it. But what Buffalo was doing is that they were saying, okay, that's a balanced look. We have a head up alignment, on the center. Some teams were approaching that and they're saying, okay, the center is going to block directly forward on that player, and then we'll double team the other two guys. And that blocking technique, like I've tagged hundreds of these plays, is clearly worse than actually double teaming the nose. So what Buffalo was doing is they would take the right guard and the center would double team that head up nose tackle, and the left guard and left tackle would double team that left three technique, and then the right three technique would essentially be blocked by the right tackle, just trying to basically get a piece of them. But it never really mattered because they were with those double teams, they were getting so much movement on that left side that they were just easily converting. And when I looked at this, for example, the double team of the nose tackle sneaks against that look were converting 6% more often than singling him up. So that's kind of the nuance that goes beyond when people just say run a sneak, don't run a sneak. Like it's really how are you blocking it? And these expert, offensive linemen and offensive line coaches go into every single detail of the footwork, not even for just the offensive line, but what is the quarterback doing? Like you've seen some teams in recent years, the quarterback's sort of getting in a staggered alignment, and that's been sort of an interesting thing that where the quarterback can sort of get their pads down and sort of torpedo forward. And that was a little bit of like a Tom Brady thing where you see some of these quarterbacks that have been criticized for not particularly good at quarterback sneaks, and what they're generally many times they're getting stood up. It's like a relatively simple fix to me where like they need to be getting their shoulder pads down in this sort of staggered alignment gives them a better shot, or avoiding taking too many false steps like right after the snap.
It seems like there's definitely a clear advantage right now if someone were to adopt this today and just make it their full go-to goal line package. But let's say all 32 started approaching it like that. It gets down to the one, it's first down, and everyone does it. Do you think the same advantage would exist if it was a league-wide trend, or would it start to get defended better, and would there have to be like an ebb and flow there a little bit?
It over time, it's clearly been a little bit more difficult. It used to be there would be really hundreds of scenarios throughout the season where there would be an open A gap or these fronts that I described there where there was just a head up nose. But now you're seeing scenarios where a lot of defenses are just really loading up the interior with double A gap, double B gap type looks. And that's it's brought the conversion rates down a little bit, but a lot of offensive coaches are getting sort of spooked on the sneaks when in reality the conversion rates are still better
Yep.
against that front but they're saying, okay, we'll go, let's run a jet sweep, or let's throw the ball, and they, next thing you know, they lose yards or they get a holding or whatever. But it's going to always be sort of like a chess match to some degree. And what I would say also is that, um, like from a coaching point standpoint, you absolutely do not want to reach the ball over the goal line unless it's fourth down. And you've seen like this happen in like horrifying moments where a team, it's like third and goal at the one, the quarterback tries to go, the ball gets punched out, and the relative risk makes no sense there. Like, you say you really want to secure the ball, obviously, to avoid potential turnover or touchback situation. But the fact that even if you don't get it, you're looking at fourth and goal with like maybe 4 inches to go.
Yeah.
Like I think that sometimes the players don't necessarily recognize that. And then interestingly, the quarterback sneaks on fourth and goal are by far better than any other option from the 1 yard line. And part of that is you see guys going over the top. And that was something that Tom would do with New England. It's something that Drew Brees would do with the Saints. But when you have that ability to sort of go over the top, especially when you see the defensive line just sort of like dive bombing low. They're all in 4 point stances, and they're trying to sort of win the leverage battle. Like, it really is a favorable thing to do, but you got to be careful doing it. We had Trevor Lawrence last year, had one, that got punched out against the Chiefs, maybe an inch or two away from the goal line. But the over the top strategy on that fourth down play I think is actually pretty sound. And go ahead.
Yeah, in like a weird roundabout way, like the 99% success rate on these type of plays in those situations, that's probably actually like a bad thing for offenses, isn't it?
What do you mean by that?
Just like in that, like they probably aren't pushing the envelope far enough. Like if this is what it is, like where should those numbers be? Like what would like if there's a sound strategy, like something being successful all the time against an opposing force, like it shouldn't exist like that. So like where should it exist? Like if everybody was doing it enough, like where would that number kind of fall at, you think?
I think just at some point there would be some equilibrium where there's essentially the same odds running a sneak versus other plays, but we're not at that point. We're not even close to that point. And so, let me pull up some numbers here that I think are relevant to sort of this narrative. But essentially, if you were looking at, I'm facing first and goal from the one, and I'm saying I'm going to run a sneak on this play, versus I'm not going to run a sneak on this play. And whatever, you can bin all those other plays, whether you want to do runs only, passes only, whatever. But if you said from that first and goal point, we're calling a sneak, and this is regardless of what happens on the future plays, you're going to score a touchdown. This is based on historical data, 94% of the time on that set of downs. If you choose any other play, it's 88%. Like, yes, oftentimes you do score. However, that's a meaningful difference. And like in a game of that, are so many games are decided by such tiny margins, that really does make a big difference. And the gap just gets wider and wider as you go down the list. So second and goal from the one, if you are facing second and goal from the one and you elect to run a QB sneak, regardless of what you do on future plays, you're looking at about a 91.5% chance you're going to get a touchdown on that series. You call anything else on that second and one play, you're looking at 83%. So like things are changing pretty significantly. You go to third and goal at the one, and it's say we're going to run a sneak no matter what, versus we're going to select another play. The sneak option on third and goal at the one, you end up scoring a touchdown on that drive 86.5% of the time. If you select something else, it's 70%. Like, that's where the gap is really wide. And then you get to fourth down, and fourth and one sneaks at the goal line are about 77% effective, and all other plays are about 52%.
It's
So,
like so mind blowing to me that you would even consider doing something else. Like it's just
and
it's
those stats right there are not considering that you just went through a sequence of sneaks. It's strictly that play. So that could have been, we ran a sneak on second and one, and then we did whatever on third and one or fourth and one if we didn't get it. If you actually modeled it out and said, okay, we're facing first and goal from the one, and we're going to sneak every time, the projected conversion rate is over 99%. If you get to second and goal from the one, say it had been first and goal from the 8, maybe you ran for 7 yards, and now you're faced with second goal from one, and you paused at that moment and said, we're going to sneak 3 times if we need to. The projected conversion rate is 97%. It's like
man.
this, it's really strong. And you see teams every single week, they get spooked, they get scared from it. And really just so many catastrophic things go happen in these moments down the goal line, and it's it's still like a, you see careers legitimately change, and like
Yep.
coaches lose jobs, quarterbacks legacies change forever, and in many instances you could really basically just reduce all the risk of bad things happening and go in a route like this, and have just incredible success.
I think too many people are afraid to like they fail twice and then they're afraid of like idiots like me, being like, oh well, why would they run the same play 3 times or and let alone 4 times in a row? Yeah, you see them get spooked and they get scared of actually going through with it. And the fact of the matter is, doing the other thing is actually the dumb thing, which is the craziest thing. There's so many things in the NFL that just kind of get controlled by gut instead of like what's actually the right thing. And because people are afraid of narratives and they are afraid of getting fired. And then by acting against those narratives, they probably actually put themselves in a stronger position to get fired and to fail and to change their legacies, which is absolutely mind blowing to me. Where do you see this going? Are there other ways that they could even make the sneak better? Like, are there things you could do to it
Yeah.
to change
So,
it?
my personal view right now of, where things stand with the tush push versus the not tush push, like, I think particularly down there at the goal line, it definitely does help if you have someone pushing in some capacity. But doing it, I really feel strongly doing it from a more normal formation gives you a little bit of a better shot, because they have to respect normal plays, and they can't come up with these like makeup. I mean, we had a guy last year, I believe, was laying on the ground before the snap. One of these teams tried
Yeah.
that. We've got just people are coming up with the craziest things you could imagine, because it's become so predictable with the tush push type, that versus, you can go back more than a decade and find snaps of everyone, no one's giving them credit for, but you can find snaps of New England just running sneaks, and the fullback is lined up in I formation and he's just pushing the quarterback, Tom Brady, forward. And that it's a natural pusher versus like the incredibly obvious one. There was a stretch when this pushing component first started back in, say, like 2021, 2022, that teams were motioning a guy in to push. And that was an interesting idea. Now some people have caught on to it. They see the tight end or receiver sort of slow down, and they begin to kind of sell out to stop it. I'm not so sure I would continue with that route there. But things are evolving over time. Like when I first sort of I was in Philadelphia, and in 2016, my first year with Doug Peterson, our team, we had 2 total sneaks. And like if you think about the Philadelphia Eagles and them being associated with sneaks, that sounds like a crazy number, but that was a legitimate number. And I had grown up in Massachusetts. I probably went to 30 Patriots games, and for that entire dynasty, their secret sauce was the quarterback sneaks. And
Yeah.
so that offseason, I really spent talking with every possible coach on like, what are the bottlenecks? Like, why are we not doing this? And then many of the arguments, like this was like when I basically manually pulled up all this data and was, I think I had tagged something like 10,000 short yardage plays to really conclusively say, when coaches say we can only run sneaks when it's under a yard, well, the data says differently. We can only do this if there's an open A gap. No, well, if there's a head up nose, it still works 88% of the time. If there's 2 guys in the A gaps, it still works over 80% of the time. That's still higher than other plays. Our quarterback can't do it. It's like, oh no, actually, when he does do it, it's 87%. And so there was always sort of a lot of arguments that you could sort of analyze, like, but teams are going to, I think, maybe try to get a little bit more creative to get lighter opportunities to do it. Like, it's not the best path to just smash forward 11 on 11. Like, it might work sometimes, but even for teams like the Eagles, it's starting to slow down a little bit. So some teams, for example, have gone to playing unbalanced alignments to sort of entice the other team to give you an open A gap, or to sort of give you a freebie look there. Or some teams are, say, lining up in a look where there's 3 tight ends split out on the right side or attached to the formation of the right side. So you have to sit there as a defensive coordinator and say, are we going to completely sell it on the inside while there's all these additional gaps on that side? So that's actually been another one where teams have sort of caught people with like a wide open sneak, either first down in the open field or a touchdown, because the coordinators have to respect that, there's an issue in terms of a run in that direction. And what I would say is, I'm not like stubborn in the sense that like you absolutely must do this, but I do think, especially on the first 3 downs, I would be doing this as much as possible. And if somehow you started first and goal at the 1 and you went 3 straight and failed, which has never happened in all the data we tried. We both looked for this, and at
Yeah.
least since 2000 in college in the NFL, it had not. There was a case in 2003 that Cordell Stewart had like a couple that he failed in a row of runs, and
Cordell Stewart.
I actually dug through it because it was like it could be sneaks, but we didn't even have any data on that. And then I found like it on YouTube, and they were not sneaks. It was just like some other run concepts. And even then, still wasn't 3 consecutive failures. But to me, like if you went 3 in a row and you did not get it by then, and you wanted to fourth down try something different, like I think that's a reasonable approach. I think, but you also you would set the record and be the first time to go three in a row in NFL history of running these and failing. But I think people really still underestimate in the whole QB sneak narrative of how just unbelievably effective the play is. And so from when we were in 2016 and we ran 2 coming into the following year, we ended up, we basically adopted this approach. Like if we got this close enough, we were going to have one play on the game plan. Essentially, it's like we were going to run a quarterback sneak, and we ended up leading the league in quarterback sneak attempts in 2017, and we won the Super Bowl. And then the message after that, from my perspective to the coaches, was that's great, whatever we had 12 or 13 sneaks, but we probably could have ran 40. And at the time they were like, this is ludicrous. Like we're not doing that. But over time, you've seen the league. I think in 2016, there was under 70 sneaks in the entire league. And this last year there was 340. So, that's just like a shocking number. And like, it's really changed the sport. And what you're saying too now is that teams that are a little bit worried about the health of their quarterback, they're putting a tight end there, or they're putting another player there. Usually it is a tight end. This last year there was 46 quarterback sneaks that were non quarterbacks. I guess we don't even want to call it a sneak anymore. Or sorry, a QB sneak. It's
Yeah.
just a sneak if it's a tight end, or maybe we come up with a different word. But you'll see, for example, the Super Bowl champs were essentially putting a tight end there, and then Sam Darnold would just stand he would stand and hang out in the back while they were just running this kind of tush push version of their own. And I think you'll see more of that just from the teams that are a little bit worried about the health of the quarterback, or they feel like maybe he's not as effective at executing the play. But I also think the world of and this one has popped up more recently, but when studying these plays, the defensive front you're facing definitely does make a difference. Like if they are selling out in there, like the conversion rates are lower. But when you're getting an open A gap, which used to be kind of the standard look, and it's declined significantly, um, quarterbacks gain at least 2 yards over 80% of the time. So this would not be plays from the 1 yard line, but say anywhere on the field, if you're running a quarterback sneak that's not inside the 2 yard line, you're getting on average well over 2 yards, and 80+% of the time you're getting 2+ yards. Like if you look at Tom Brady's quarterback sneak career, about 83% of the time his sneaks got 2+ yards. So what I think the next kind of one of the next frontiers there is running the play on 3rd and 2.
Yeah.
Because if you're under center, it's an open A gap, there is no other run play that is even remotely close to 83% success rate on a 3rd and 2. And then just like we talked about with the failures at the goal line, that sneak occurring, and if it does fail, so say 83% of the time you convert and then 17% of the time you don't convert, so many of the failures brought you much closer to the line to gain that the fourth down might be 4th and inches or 4.5 yard. And I think people still kind of underestimate that, and they don't necessarily pick up on that. So another interesting nuance of it is like if you're in the open field, if you want to run a sneak on 2nd and 1, it's actually technically like a negative expected value play. And that might not be entirely obvious to people, but say if you're say you had it was a touchback, the ball's at the 35-yard line, and your first play you gain 9 yards and it's 2nd and 1 from the 44. If you get a sneak and just get 1 or 2 yards, you're actually slightly worse off with a 1st and 10 at the 45 or at the 46 than the 2nd and 1 from the 44. And that's partly because of the big play potential of that 2nd and 1. And you really need to gain like say 4 or 5 yards on that 2nd and 1 play to be considered technically better off than
Yeah, that makes
before.
sense.
Now, as you get into the 4th quarter and you're managing the score, that's a different story. Like, because, obviously continuing to move the chains is valuable, or if you're in 4-minute offense and whatnot, like it's really a very effective strategy. Now I'll bring up this last year's national championship as well. where Indy, we had the national champs were going down the field, and they had a 2nd and 1, and they're leading towards the end of the game, and I believe they actually got a penalty and moved themselves back. They ended up not succeeding on the drive. But if you imagine you're in 2nd and 1 and you're 4-minute offense, and you're like, we're going to sneak 3 consecutive times, they basically could have ended the game probably 98% of the time. And then, they didn't go this route. They ended up having to sweat it out a little bit as Miami got the ball back with a chance to actually win the game down the stretch. So you'll see, I think you'll see it in 4-minute offense a little bit more. And then really, you get all the way down on the goal line, and I cannot believe that no one has done this yet. And it's going to sound crazy, and I kind of just laugh about it because some of these ideas that I've brought up in the past sounded, crazy and ludicrous to people. And, next thing you know, everyone in the league is sort of coming up with their own version of say running a lot of sneaks or going for 4th downs or going for 2-point conversions. But I think that you're going to start seeing teams have a player take a full speed running start and be one of the pushing players. And so what I mean by that is essentially, if you can picture a offensive lineman or a tight end being 10 to 12 yards deep and being split out wide, and they are running parallel to the line of scrimmage and getting a full speed running start, and then at the snap they are veering upwards, and then they're going to be your assisting pushing player. They're going to come in late, but the idea being like they're potentially going to seal the deal. And just from like a basic physics perspective of just mass and momentum, I would much rather have a player doing that than just standing stationary, just helping guide the player. But I think it's even better if you have one or two players potentially pushing close by, and then somebody that's coming for like a sort of second surge. And there's been a couple colleges, and Chip Kelly was doing this at UCLA, which I think caught my attention in particular. Was he was running quarterback sneaks from this T formation, which is like, I don't even know when that was invented, in like the 1920s maybe, but they were having snaps where those three players are lined up at say 5 yards, and they're hitting the line of scrimmage at roughly the same time with running starts. And so essentially the ball snap, the quarterback begins a sneak. It's a little bit of a stalemate in there. And then you get three players running full speed and just smashing the kind of the entire group forward. And like, there's a snap that they had against USC where I think Dorian Thompson Robinson ended up 7 yards into the end zone doing this exact play. And it's like, so to me, I think there's a whole world there where these sort of running start opportunities are potentially better for assisting the quarterback rather than having a guy that's sort of stationary helping. And I think that it's like sort of an experimental world where you have to think about what exactly is your, like, are you doing this with your starting quarterback? Are you doing this with your tight end? Are you concerned a little bit about the potential injury risk of somebody running full speed and hitting the quarterback? Or I think there's some discussion points there, but I think there's a world where this could actually sort of put the sort of pushing sneak plays into sort of overdrive, and I really think that could be sort of a next frontier.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that could work with like a receiver doing it? Because teams have tried to already do some stuff off of like the tush push, where you see someone come in reverse and you kind of get the fake and get the handoff on the sweep or whatever. Like, could you maybe build it into that and get an advantage as well, or does it need to be a bigger guy?
I think there's no doubt. I was just simply thinking like, if I was approaching it and I'm like, I want just as much momentum as
Yeah.
possible.
Okay.
That these bigger guys, you've seen snaps where like teams take Trent. Kyle Shanahan has Trent Williams running full speed, and he's close to the line of scrimmage, but then he's say kicking out an end, and he just completely obliterates them. And it sort of got me thinking of like, why couldn't you maybe do that with a bigger guy?
Yeah.
But I think you could absolutely do it with receivers, and you probably would have a little bit more of a selling point using the play, just because it's a little bit more organic. Like, okay, then maybe this receiver is going in orbit motion because that's just what receivers do on some plays. But I also think there's scenarios where essentially, if you're in a situation in a game that is like sort of low leverage and the outcome is sort of determined, I would not run this play because I want the opponent to think going forward that I have other plays. Like, so say it's first, second, third, or third and goal, I might mix in something else. Say it's week 17 of the season. And I think that's kind of where Buffalo sort of put themselves in a difficult proposition, because it was 70 consecutive times that they went left. They could have been sitting there in a relatively meaningless week 18 game and gone right and at least thrown off Steve Spagnuolo to some degree. And I think that being 100% on anything and any tendency in the NFL is a tricky proposition because the other team is going to be in the attitude like, we know exactly what you're going to do. We're going to try to stop it. So I think having some ability to occasionally keep people honest is important. However, in these pivotal moments, like if I'm in the Super Bowl, this is the play that I want to run. And you know, I'll never forget. So like we were playing in the Super Bowl against the Patriots in 2018, and we actually got to a 3rd and 1 in the fourth quarter. About I think we were on our own 43 or so yard line, and it was 3rd and 1. And I had actually hit Coach Peterson on the week where I said back-to-back sneaks, we're looking at probably 97% success rate in the open field because the quarterback sneak conversion rates are higher in the open field than down there on the goal line. It's still the best play on the goal line, but it's even better, you know, in the open field from an expected value standpoint, just because you're not, you know, the other team isn't necessarily in cover zero, like they're not necessarily going in goal line defense and whatnot. But he ended up calling a pass, or it was like a pass RPO thing on 3rd and 1, and we're down by 1 in the Super Bowl. And so when he calls this play, like I was thinking of like communicating the 4th down information. I'm doing the game management stuff on the headset. My attitude was like, okay, I'm going to say, you know, anything 4th and X or less, you know, we go for it. And he calls this play, and all of a sudden, like my heart just kind of stopped because I'm like, if he gets sacked here, this is going to be a disaster. And so, you know, I'm sitting there, and at the same time, there's like graphics on the screen because, you know, when you're up there in the booth, you can see, you get access to like the broadcast copy. You just are not allowed to have any audio. And there's like stats popping up. It's like Patriots over 500 yards and 0 punts. So I'm like bringing this up, and I'm saying, even if we get sacked, I think we strongly should go for this. Like, I don't even care what my analytics model says. Like, we have not stopped this team whatsoever in this game. Now, the model actually did say go for 4th and much longer if it came up. And sure enough, on the 3rd and 1, Nick Foles very nearly gets sacked for like a 6 or 7 yard loss, and he just barely gets the ball off. And then it's 4th and 1. We end up going for it. We throw like a mesh route to Ertz, and then we go down and we actually score on the drive. But I was thinking, like, for as controversial as the Philly special play was, the potential play there where like we might have been 4th and 6 or 7 at our own 39 yard line in the fourth quarter and going for 4th down, like that would have been even more controversial. And I was like, thankfully it did not come up. But that to me also was like an example of why have like a preference towards the successive sneak strategy, because if we had approached that, really the worst case was that we were going to be probably sitting at 4.5 yard, maybe 4th and 1 for that next play. And then I think just one of the nuances, like if you're a defensive coach and say the opposing teams are, you have a pretty good beat that they're just going to sneak as much as possible down there, you know, I would be trying to over sub and go with as many big players as possible. And that sort of the pivotal Patriots, Seahawks, Malcolm Butler interception play, a lot of that happened because Belichick ran a goal line 3-corner group that really sort of threw Seattle off because there wasn't, and it was not easy from 11 personnel to run the ball against goal line. So like, for example, if I was a defensive coordinator, I would be trying to get my goal line defense in the game as quickly as possible, say after a big play down to the 1 yard line or after a 2nd and goal play down to the 1 or 2, just to give yourself some bigger bodies to potentially slow it down. And on the flip side, if I'm on offense and I get down to the 1, I would like to have, some kind of word to prevent the other team from subbing. And, it's kind of an entertaining world, but a lot of coaches really like having code words. And I'll give you an example. Like they're one of these teams that ran a lot of sneaks over the years. They would use the word Snoopy for sneak. And it's like, it starts with SN or whatever.
Yeah.
And they would just say Snoopy, Snoopy, and they would run a sneak. But there's all these different code words that kind of sound the same. So as I was thinking about this, I'm thinking like, okay, like what's a word? Like you get a 20-yard gain and you're yelling to everybody so they can't sub. I'm like, well, maybe something related to the end zone. And I'm like, well, maybe you start saying Enzo, or whatever it is. And so everyone knows, like on your side, like, okay, we are not subbing. Let's get on the ball. If they try to sub, let's get on the ball and let's get them, busted with 12 guys on the field or whatever it is. So I think that that's going to be a little bit of a chess match too, because if there was something that was going to make things a little bit trickier to run sneaks in some of these situations, it's if you decide to go with light personnel and the defense says like, okay, we're literally putting we're going to get in like an 8-1 look in goal line and say like that's going to be a little bit more challenging to do it. But ultimately, I think that if teams adopted this, and I was looking at some of these numbers, you're probably looking at potentially 200 plus more sneak touchdowns per season in the NFL, which the fantasy football people would freak out. And I told a couple of fantasy football guys, I said, don't do any drafts on Monday, because if this gets any traction, all of a sudden you have to start thinking about like, and then people were giving, the Eagles a hard time because Jalen Hurts was getting a lot of touchdowns from the one, and Barkley wasn't getting as many touchdowns because he wasn't getting the handoffs from the one. But you could see a world where, there's a number of teams with 10 plus quarterback sneak touchdowns, and all of a sudden in the fantasy football world, your math is changing dramatically if you thought you were going to get this or that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna put the running backs out of business, man. They're gonna
Yeah.
be
I don't want anyone to dislike me, but I think that's that's actually a consideration for sure, that some of those guys would get those relatively easy touchdowns from the 1 yard line. They might not be so happy.
I mean, they get paid off touchdowns too. Like we're
Right.
gonna mess up some people's money here. I think if I'm a head coach and you're giving me the elevator pitch, the little quick liner on why to do this, and with the bottom line, just counter examples or anything like what is it like? What's the quick pitch and like the quick con pitch?
I think just the quickest summary is no one's ever been stopped on 4 sneaks on a set of downs.
There it
No
is.
one no one's ever been stopped on 3 sneaks on a set of downs. And not only is it a machine-like operation, it basically never loses yards. And so you avoid those disaster situations. I guess the other one I have to throw in there is the league is officiating the offensive offsides much tighter now. Like, so please practice this and do not have your right guard put his hands too far forward or whatever. That's a consideration too. But um, we could make a full reel of coaches like losing games because of some of these 1 yard to go situations that they just could not get that final yard, and it may have resulted in them losing their job or their team not making the Super Bowl or them not winning the national championship. And I think that those moments, it's really incredible to think about. And it's just like for all the analytics people, criticisms of they're advocating, their 4th downs are too aggressive. They want to be too aggressive. This is actually less aggressive. This is the least aggressive, and it's the best thing to do. So like you can't kill me and say, oh, he just wants to go for all the 4th downs. Like this is scaling back the risk and actually protecting you from the worst outcomes.
He's Ryan Paganetti. He's going to put running backs out of business. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Ben Johnson tendencies and taking you deeper inside the game. This is what we plan to do every single day on this channel. Make sure you're subscribing, leave a comment, tell a friend, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.